Welcome back to the Missing Maura Murray podcast. I am Tim, here today in the Empty Frames studio with Lance. What's up, Lance?
What is going on? The Empty Frames Crawl Space Studios, nestled in Wormtown. Doing pretty well over here. How are you?
I'm well. We have a really pretty awesome interview with former FBI agent Bobby Chacon.
And while Bobby Chacon wasn't directly involved in the investigation for Maura, we always like to get insight from law enforcement. This is a former FBI agent with just a wealth of knowledge and just a vast amount of stories. After a little bit of technical difficulties, we had a conversation with him that probably could have gone on for another 2 hours or so.
Easily.
Yeah.
And hopefully he'll be at CrimeCon and we can meet him in person there. But I know he was there last year and he does a little bit with CrimeCon, so that was kind of how we met him. So it's a really fun conversation and really hope you enjoy it.
And we just wanted to thank real quickly our very generous sponsors. Without them, this wouldn't be possible. Stamps.com, RX Bar, and Blue Apron. Also, be sure to check out our websites. We have crawlspacepodcast.com, fun stuff on there, informative stuff, as well as emptyframespodcast.com.
In addition to MauraMurrayDoc.com. And check us out on social media. Also, we launched a new podcast this week. It's called Empty Frames. Check that out at empty_frames on Twitter.
And one more quick reminder that the anniversary of Maura's disappearance is coming up February 9th. We will be doing a Facebook Live event at 7 p.m. Eastern Time with Julie Murray and Curtis Murray.
So check out facebook.com/MauraMurrayDoc at 7 p.m. Eastern and get your candle ready. We are going to do a synchronized candle lighting. There will be audio of that released as our next podcast episode. So thank you very much, and please keep Maura in your thoughts.
We've had a variety of guests on Missing Maura Murray, and they all sort of run the gamut. Some are directly related to the case, and some are related to law enforcement. So when we got the opportunity to speak to a retired FBI agent about the circumstances of anything, any case, including this case, we're going to jump at it. So, yes, just extending you a long-winded thank you.
No, thank you very much. I think the work you guys have done on this case and to keep it in the spotlight and to keep it in the public consciousness is probably the most valuable thing that's happened to it. We know that from this case that, information from the police has been few and far between, and leads seem to have been few and far between. So really the thing that keeps cases like this going is, things like your podcast that keep cases like this alive, and the documentary that happened. And without those things, I knows where this case would be.
Well, yeah, thank you. I don't know if we really knew that was going to happen right away, maybe until like episode 20-something, 30-something, and we realized that the more you talk about it, yeah, there are going to be mistakes that are made by us along the way, but hey, people are talking about it, and we connect with former U.S. Marshal Art Roderick, and we're connecting with Bobby Chacon now. So I know a lot of people might think that it's not related, but it's all related.
Yeah, well, we used to tell when I worked with Bureau and we would respond to missing kids cases, those are like more the active investigation. As the parents, stay out in front of the cameras as much as you can. As long as the media is going to camp out in front of your house, use them. Keep the case in the public eye. Keep the spotlight on the case. And that's the way things happen. That's the way leads come in. That's the way somebody sees something or hears something of value and reports it. And it's just it's such a useful tool. And sometimes in these colder cases, it's the only tool that's available.
Right. Let's get for anyone who doesn't know who Bobby Chacon is, why don't we have Bobby Chacon tell us who he is?
I was a much younger man. I went to law school. I graduated from Hofstra University Law School. So I was a lawyer, and then I joined the FBI way back in 1987. I became an FBI agent, and I spent 27 years working as an FBI agent, and I was proud to say that I spent all 27 years at the working street agent level. So I worked cases my whole career. I never had the desire to raise my hand and go into management and climb the corporate ladder within the FBI to go to FBI headquarters or anything like that. So I worked all 27 years as a street agent and working cases. The first half of my career approximately was as a lead investigator on cases, major international narcotics cases, Italian mafia cases in New York City. And then towards the middle of my career, I transitioned into the forensic world, and I became a forensic investigator for the FBI. I was trained by the FBI laboratory, and I actually began working directly for the FBI laboratory, but I stayed out in the field. And that actually led me to the underwater world. And so I developed the FBI's underwater forensic program, which grew from the one dive team that I was on in New York, which was the only dive team in the FBI at the time. And we expanded that under the lab's desire to have more forensically trained underwater investigators within the FBI. And we created 3 more dive teams. And now the program consists of 4 dive teams: New York, LA, Miami, and DC. And those 4 teams divide up the world, really divide up the globe. And each of those 4 teams has an area of responsibility, both domestically in the U.S. and overseas. And they'll respond to things like plane crashes or, body recoveries. Like just my LA team was involved in the Lacey Peterson case years ago. We were involved in the space shuttle crash in Texas in 2003. We were involved in, I know many people know the Israel Keys case, who was a serial killer and caught up in Alaska. He had kidnapped and murdered a barista up in Alaska and put her body under a frozen lake north of Anchorage. And so our dive team went out there and recovered her body. And so, so we did things like that. I've been to southern Iraq with the dive team, with the FBI dive team. During the way, I spent a year living in Athens, Greece. When they took me away from forensics for a little while, I spent a year in Athens, Greece, helping the Greeks prepare for the Summer Olympics of 2004, counterterrorism measures that we had done in Salt Lake in 2002. So I had some experience with that. So they used that experience and sent me to Athens, Greece for a year. Then I came back to Los Angeles and ultimately ran the dive team here until I retired in 2014. After retiring, I was lucky enough I moved to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, with my wife and 2 rescue dogs, where my wife was producing the 2016 Summer Olympics. I was full-time retired until about a year into that. I got a call from a retired FBI agent in Los Angeles, Jim Clemente, and he asked me if I was willing to come back to LA and be a technical advisor on a series called Criminal Minds Beyond Borders, which was a spin-off of the very popular Criminal Minds series. Our show starred Gary Sinise, and our show was a little different because our team, they called it Beyond Borders because we were the overseas team. So each week, instead of going to a city around the country like the regular Criminal Minds team does, we went to another country. And so they were working anywhere from Paris one week to Tokyo the next week and stuff. So that was our series. Unfortunately, that lasted only 2 seasons and got canceled. But during that same time, being back and forth from Brazil, now we're back full time in Los Angeles. I became involved through that endeavor with some true crime shows. So I started working on shows like I Married a Murderer and Murderous Affairs and Deep Undercover and Corrupt Crimes. There's just a whole number of shows that people might see me on in front of the camera giving, commentary about the cases and stuff. Recently, I was on a show that's going to premiere, I think, on the Science Channel in a couple of weeks called Deadly Intelligence, which is about a bunch of their real true crime shows, cases where scientists met suspicious ends while working on some secret government project. And so we had a dozen cases we highlighted of scientists who, a strange-looking suicide, which we think wasn't a suicide, things like that, where scientists have met their ends under suspicious circumstances. I just did an episode of Hunting Hitler on History Channel, which is based on 700 declassified documents from the FBI from years ago. And Bob Baer of the CIA and his team took all that information and they went on a trek across from Berlin through Norway, ultimately to Argentina, to track this supposed trail of Hitler escaping. They brought me in to review all the evidence that Bob and his team had amassed during that season 3. And I kind of turned a critical eye to it. I kind of tested their evidence and said what I believed to be valid, what might not be, and things like that. And then just last week, I played a similar role. They called me in to do a case, something called The Unsolved on Discovery ID. It's a new show. That was about a wrongfully convicted gentleman, a security guard that was convicted of rape and murder of a young girl, and he spent 11 years in jail before he was exonerated. And so I took a look at that case and stuff, and that I just did. That was a one episode of that case. Other than that, this week is something called Real Screen in Washington, D.C., and I've got 2 different production companies there pitching true crime shows that have me attached as host. So hopefully the next time we talk, I'll be hosting my own show.
So that is quite an accomplished career, Bobby. Pretty flattering that you're willing to talk to us.
Not at all.
Yeah, I'm just curious when you sleep.
Yeah.
Oh, I got, writing now in a career like now, it's pretty easy. I mean, I sit at this computer all day writing, and then CNN will call, or MSNBC or Fox will call and say, can you run over to the studio and talk about the Russia investigation? Or can you, Ashley Banfield's show will call from New York and say, can you come on Crime and Justice and talk about, a murdered mom found cut up into 2 suitcases? And I run over to the studio and do that. And there's minimal preparation for stuff like that. So, I've always been an active guy. That's probably why I didn't go into management while I was in the FBI. I never wanted to sit behind a desk or push papers around, but it seems I'm doing more of that now than I ever did before. I certainly wear a suit now a lot more than I ever did in my FBI career.
Right.
But that's just a function. I never went into management, never wanted to, but we find the time. I've got 2 rescue dogs that are watching me right now. And
Nice.
One we brought back from Russia, and when my wife was producing the Olympics there, and she actually emailed a picture of a dog from South Korea this morning, which is where she is now producing the Olympics. And I just said, look, no way. Just don't even think about it.
So you've got 3 dogs. So you got 3 rescue dogs now.
Yeah, apparently. I'm waiting to see.
I'm curious how you go from lawyer to FBI agent. You made it sound so seamless. It's like, I was a lawyer and then I was an FBI agent. Like, how does that process happen?
Well, surprisingly enough, that's quite common. Well, it was quite common back then. The FBI, 15 years ago, whenever we were born, in 1908, I believe. It was a part of the Justice Department, and the Attorney General in Washington had no federal aid. There were no federal agents out there. There were revenue agents in the IRS. That was about it. And so the birthplace of the FBI was within the Justice Department. He took a young Justice Department lawyer, and he said, you need to set up a group of agents that are actually working out in the field. That young Justice Department lawyer was J. Edgar Hoover. And he recruited a bunch of other Justice Department guys, younger guys, who then kind of started living in different cities and become investigators. So the tradition of the FBI really was you couldn't become an FBI agent back in the day unless you were a lawyer or an accountant.
Oh, right.
And that traditional history carried on. Even my class in 1987 was probably 50 to 60% attorneys and or accountants. Much less now. With the advent of computers, we need a lot more computer scientists, language capabilities. And the FBI has not only that, it's always addressed its needs through the recruitment process, so whatever it needed at the time, but it also started recognizing around the same, little bit slower than society in general, but the FBI also just, started realizing that diversity within its workforce is a strength. And so it started recruiting people from much different backgrounds and stuff. And so right now, if you walked into an academy class in Quantico, it probably looks a whole lot different. But back when I went through, it wasn't uncommon for attorneys. In fact, I went to law school thinking I was going to go into the NYPD because that's where my brother and my father both were. And my father actually is the one that encouraged me to go into the FBI. They came around at a recruiting day at a law school, which they often do. because they still like attorneys to go in as agents. And so I filled out an application in law school, and 2 years later I was in Quantico.
Wow, that's impressive. I love the idea that you founded a. You were one of the founders, or were you the founder of the Underwater Forensic Unit?
Well, there was people before me who started this dive team in New York, but it was basically confined to New York, and it wasn't really under the auspices of the FBI laboratory. So we really weren't forensically trained. So when I came on the team in 1995, and the first big job we had was TWA Flight 800, where we lost 230 people out in the ocean. We were kind of really learning as we went along, and it was about 1999 that the FBI laboratory took notice of the work we were doing and said, look, we really need to kind of get you guys underneath, because forensic science, is really starting to explode now with DNA and all this stuff. Unless you have that kind of background and somebody like the FBI laboratory kind of backing you up, your credibility is not going to be there. The team leader that had the team when I was there, he didn't want to go full-time diver. He was doing his other job, and he dove part-time, and he came to me and he said, look, would you want to leave your kind of investigative world behind that you've been doing for 15, 20 years and could become a full-time diver? And so I jumped at the chance, and I was the first full-time diver in FBI history. That means I went to the FBI laboratory. I got forensically trained in all the same methodologies that our regular crime scene people use when they go into a house or a car or any general crime scene. Never really applied those skills the way they do, because I was only learning those as they applied to underwater. But I went through the whole course that they go through. And then I started building the other three dive teams, basically duplicating what we had done in New York. And then it took me about 2 to 3 years. I had a very good friend who was a supervisor at the FBI laboratory with me, and he was assigned to the lab where he worked full time in the evidence response team unit, but he was a non-diver. So he was a very good crime scene guy. I was the diver, he was the crime scene guy, and the two of us kind of merged our expertise and built the program.
That's impressive. It kind of puts things into perspective when Tim and I are proud of our Crawl Space Studios here. not quite the same.
Yeah, not exactly, but we're getting there. These days, you can get just about anything online and on demand. Do you know that you can even get postage on demand with Stamps.com?
Remarkable. Well, you can. With Stamps.com, you can print real U.S. postage for any letter or any package right away from your home or office, all available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, whenever it's convenient for you, Tim.
It's pretty amazing, Lance. Stamps.com will even send you a digital scale so you can weigh your letters and packages and print the exact amount of postage every time, because you never want to give too many stamps. You know how you do that sometimes? But it's so easy to do. You just click, print, and mail, and you're done. Stamps.com is such a no-brainer.
And Stamps.com will save you so much time, because you can access all the services that you'd get at the post office right from your desk. It's never been easier to send out your letters or packages.
And here at Missing Maura Murray, we are really busy. So we rely on Stamps.com to print out shipping labels so we can send out all of our mail. It couldn't be easier.
And why don't you tell them about the special deal that we've worked out with Stamps.com?
Oh, it's really great. It's a 4-week trial plus postage and a digital scale without long-term commitments. I know you don't like long-term commitments, Lance.
That's why they call me Captain Short Term.
So go to Stamps.com, click on the microphone at the top of the homepage, and type in MMM.
That's Stamps.com. Enter MMM.
Let's talk about the Maura Murray case a little bit. Have you worked on missing person cases in the FBI?
I have. Yes, I have. Most of them were the standard cases that you hear about, where, a child goes missing, or, a child, I talk anywhere from 5 to 15 usually are 16, upper teens. Because once they're over 18, obviously, then it becomes a different ballgame, because now you're talking about adults, and whether they ran away or a victim of foul play becomes an issue, right? But most of the ones where I was involved in were missing kids. You go out into the field, you lock arm in arm, or you stand a couple of feet away, you walk through the woods. I was part of a number of, efforts like that, and the FBI brings to bear and can bring to bear. That's one of the things we bring to the table, is like hundreds of agents at a moment's notice drop everything they're doing and drive 200 or 300 miles, and everybody gets together and you do these massive searches. So yes, I was involved in those. From the dive team standpoint, from the forensic standpoint, usually when we were called in, they knew where the body was or had a very strong indication of where the body was. So although we went into it, what most people thought was still a missing persons case. And I'll use the Samantha Koenig case in Alaska as an example. When we flew into town that Sunday morning, the entire town was still out looking for her. I remember that night, we flew in late. I stopped at a fast food restaurant in the drive-thru. They still had her picture there, posted there. There were billboards around town, still looking for her, still holding out hope. We flew up because on Saturday, the investigators had a breakthrough, and Israel Keys told them where the body was. So we checked into that hotel, 8 FBI agents or 10 FBI agents with a lot of gear. And, the hotel clerk is going, wow, all these FBI agents, you must be here for the Samantha case or whatever. We can't say anything because we arrive on scene, and, the entire town and the family still has hope. We know that hope is gone. And our job is to find that person, bring them back, and kind of snuff out that hope and put everybody back on the road to recovery. So missing, yes, but oftentimes when we were called in, we knew that the person wasn't, missing really anymore, and it was our job to go bring them back.
Well, what's your takeaways from the investigation into Maura's disappearance, from when it first when the police first arrived on scene to today? Do you have? I know that's a huge question.
Yeah, no, there's certain elements of this case that make it inherently difficult and different from a lot of other cases that we talk about and that we've experienced. Like I just said, with missing children, it's a lot different because everybody turns out. When there's an adult missing, it takes one notch below the urgency, because this is an adult. Maybe they ran away. So you don't have that sense of urgency. It's not an 8-year-old child that all of a sudden is missing from their bedroom. So the urgency there is different. And then the way this whole case has started was simply a broken down car on the side of the road. Well, that happens a million times every day in the United States. How many times today are police officers rolling up on a car that's simply seemingly abandoned, right? So it's not treated as a crime. You couldn't possibly treat every car that they roll up on as a crime scene, right? And we know that, there are times when, unless you approach it from a crime scene from the very beginning, valuable things can be lost. And it's through no fault of anybody in a case like this, because you couldn't possibly, every abandoned car on the side of the road stop and conduct a crime scene on it, right? And so, those are the little kind of things that this case had that kind of resulted in what we're seeing now, in valuable time lost, maybe valuable opportunities lost. But, it's hard to find fault in some of them. And some of them, yes, and some of them, no, in this case. And so I think in this case, it's a huge mystery. And it's one that kind of draws me in, because you just normally my investigation, there's more clues to go on. There's more things to find. However, in talking to agents and detectives across the country that are in cold case units and do missing persons cases for a living full time, there is a scary amount, a disturbing amount of missing people in this country that just go unaccounted for. Most of them women, unfortunately. And so, this is just, it's almost like the scourge of our time. It's like an epidemic. It's like the plague. And there's just not enough resources to put into all of these cases. Now, somebody could say the majority of them are runaways or people that they're adults that just don't want to be found anymore or whatever. But, for each one of them, there's families somewhere or friends or somebody that's missing them and needs to, know what happened to them. But in this case, like I said, there's so little to go on in this case that it presents a real tough one.
Yeah, we actually were talking about that just recently, like the idea that the police in Haverhill came upon this car, and we understand it makes sense because it's not a crime yet. There's no evidence that this is a crime. You can't treat it as a crime. If you did, you'd lose one or two guys out of your 4-person force. But it got us thinking, like, could there, like, so there's this gray area between that isn't a missing persons case yet because no one has reported it. It's not 24 hours. And there's this car, or there's this emptiness. Is there some protocol that can be created that is some kind of, like, that fits inside that gray area? Because we also work on the Brianna Maitland case, and really it's a very similar situation where there was a car found on the side of the road, and the woman, 17-year-old female, is gone and has been gone for almost the exact same amount of time as Maura Murray. So it got us talking. Is there some kind of protocol that ought to be created or logistically could be created to fill this gray area?
I don't know that there is, because, and I hate to say it's a resource issue, but it could boil down to being a manpower and resource issue. And in this respect, we know that, like, if every town had enough cops to do every single job, then it would be fine, right? And you don't want to say, well, this is a young girl, and you just can't say that you don't have the resources. But, you have to back up, and you're not looking at it from the missing girl perspective. You're looking at it from the abandoned car on the side of the road perspective. And so, it's tough. Looking in hindsight, you say, oh, we should have done this car, we should have done that car. But, like, I don't know if they even keep statistics on how many, abandoned cars, on the side of the road were interacted with by police officers around the country today. It's probably in the hundreds, if not thousands. And so, it's probably, that case, this particular case, it could have been, she walked back, 3 miles to find a phone or a diner that she had just been in, to use the phone to call AAA to have them come because she couldn't get cell coverage. There's so many different things that happen to deploy resources. And let me tell you, like, I used to say this for the dive teams and why the FBI only has 4 dive teams. I used to argue with a lot of field offices out there, Chicago and Houston, wanted their own dive teams. And I said, look, having a very well-trained forensic team, it takes time, it takes effort, it takes training, and it takes money. And so we decided in the FBI that these 4 regional teams would cover the rest of the country and provide services to all the other field offices, because it doesn't make sense for all those other, because the FBI has 56 field offices. That means 52 field offices do not have dive teams, 4 do. And it doesn't make economical sense for them to stand up a dive team, equip it, then train it, and keep them proficient in the underwater forensic methods that they'll need to do if they only have 1 or 2 dives a year. So by those 4 teams sharing the workload across the country, they're working all the time. So those perishable skills are always fresh. And so forensic teams do require, to do it right, you have to do it often. And to do it often takes a lot of money and time and experience. And if you're in a small town, and you get a crime scene, you got to find the crime scene kit. You may have gone to school 5 years ago, and you've got to look in the basement of the police station and blow the dust off the crime scene kit, because now you're going to go out and do a crime scene. Well, we've seen that's not always the best way to prosecute a crime scene, effectively. And so, to treat each of these cases, now the protocols might be to freeze the car and not let anybody in, but it's tough. It's a tough. This is just such a common occurrence. A car on the side of the road is just such a common occurrence that, I don't know. I would be, I would like to say that, we should be able to find the money to have teams do that. But just governments, especially small, local municipalities and even counties and states, there's always a struggle for resources. You can't tax the citizens into oblivion just so you can fund all of these different things. And so it becomes a matter of, desiring where your money needs to go. There are after school programs. There are lunch programs for children who can't afford to bring lunch to school. There are a lot of different things that mayors struggle with and county executives struggle with on where to put their resources. And this would just be one of those, tough calls.
And you also have to take into account the human element when you're a police officer and you arrive on the scene and it's an abandoned vehicle, and you might, see some sort of maybe a indication that the driver was drinking, and you just go to the catalog of knowledge that you have based on experience, which is okay. They probably wandered off and they're going to come back when they're a little bit more sober to avoid the drunk driving charge. But from what you said, right. The response that Tim and I get a lot is what you just said, where there's a lot, there's not even a statistic of how many abandoned cars are found on the side of the road. I don't want to get into like using words that shouldn't be used, but that sounds like an epidemic of abandoned cars. So when does a protocol become necessary?
It becomes necessary when you can start tying those cars to actual crimes.
Gotcha.
But if 99.9% of those cars are just simply abandoned because either they were stolen or because they were broke and somebody came back with a tow truck to pick it up, or you have if you had it where it becomes an epidemic is if a bunch of people never claimed them, and you start. But in probably the vast overwhelming majority of times, there's a reasonable explanation of why that car was there or abandoned there.
Right.
And, and it may take a day, it may take 3 days, 5 days, depending on where you are and the circumstance of that particular car, when the police, resolve that situation. And that's why probably almost always those situations are resolved.
Lance, I found these new protein bars. Have you heard of RX Bar?
RX Bar? Delicious.
Ridiculous, right?
I love it because they list out the ingredients here and you know exactly what you're getting into when you bite into one.
Isn't that great? Their ingredients do the talking. So it's simply like eating 3 egg whites, 2 dates, and 6 almonds.
With no BS. It even says no BS here.
Yeah. What does that stand for?
I think it means Bachelor of Science.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure you don't have to have a Bachelor of Science to eat this.
To eat one.
Yeah.
So it turns out real food ingredients actually taste really good. You can actually taste the cacao, the real fruit, and the spices like sea salt.
Which is great because whether you like sweet or savory, chocolate or fruit flavors, there's an RX bar for you. If you check out crawlspacepodcast.com and go to the RX bar link, you'll see a series of pictures that show you all the different varieties.
11 delicious flavor varieties. RX bars are gluten-free, soy-free, and
they're dairy-free. Remember that time I thought I was lactose intolerant?
Yeah. And then you said that it was just a mental trick on yourself?
Someone once said, I thought you were lactose intolerant, Lance. And I was like, maybe I am. But if I was, which I'm not, this would be perfect for me. What would you have an RX bar for?
Everything for breakfast, for right before we start podcasting.
Snacks in the office.
Sometimes we have to record during the afternoon when I'm tired, Lance. I'm not going to be drinking coffee at 3 p.m., so this is a great energy boost.
Throw it in your bag.
So for 25% off your first order, visit rxbar.com/MMM and enter promo code MMM at checkout.
That's rxbar.com/MMM and enter promo code MMM at checkout.
Now, we happen to know that there were some some underwater searches in the Maura Murray case.
Oh, really?
Yeah, French Pond, which is pretty close to the crash site. We know that was searched, but we don't know anything more. Obviously, they didn't find Maura because that we would have known. But I guess my question is, how intensive would a dive team search of a local pond be? And I don't know if one of your teams did it from the FBI or not, or who did it exactly. But like, is there any chance that Maura Murray is still there?
Well, I hate to say it, but, during my time in the FBI dive program, I interacted, and part of my job, especially in the early years, was going and talking to the U.S. Navy, to agencies like NOAA and EPA, who had federal dive teams already in place, and commercial diving, scientific diving, and universities. So I took a best practices and kind of put our program together based on, all of the modern techniques and technology that all of these other agencies and institutions were using. I brought that to the law enforcement forensics, and when I started, I would say we were at the forefront of that in the law enforcement world. I would say certain big cities like NYPD, LAPD, Long Beach PD, and here in California have kind of met us. They've kind of come up to that with a lot of, after 9/11, with a lot of Homeland Security money, a lot of cities, their dive teams really got beefed up and stuff. So they have the technology. Now, but the thing that remains is across the country in law enforcement diving, you have a tremendous variation in the amount of diving these people do, the skills they have, the techniques they use, and their proficiency. And so it really depends on who did the diving to make that kind of statement. I mean, I was constantly being asked to spearhead and lead federal committees on standardizing across the country law enforcement diving and forensic diving, and we just could never get it done because you don't have an overriding authority. Like in the fire world, I even talked to firemen in the fire world. They have a Uniform Fire Act where a lot of the fire codes are nationwide, and your fire department has to meet those codes. And you have some of that in the law enforcement world, but not in the diving world. So you still have a lot of diving, sheriff's dive teams that are made up of volunteers, and they're not law enforcement, not forensically trained. So, there's a wide variation of capabilities, across the law enforcement spectrum as far as underwater forensics goes. I wouldn't even call most of those teams underwater forensic teams. They're just dive teams. And that's a big difference.
Gotcha.
And so it really would depend on who searched that pond. I mean, I always said when I left a job, I said, if we didn't find what we were looking for in the water, it was because it wasn't there. And one of the benefits we had was the FBI always gave us enough time to do it. My bosses would simply say, how much time do you need? Whereas I know, like, when I worked with certain other departments, their dive teams were given like three days to do it because some of their deputies were pulled off a road patrol. So other deputies had to be called in to cover their road shifts because now those deputies have to get overtime because the other guy's diving. So the sheriff goes, hey, the clock's ticking. I can't have these guys diving for a week or two because they've got to get back on their road patrol. So you run into situations like that. And in the forensic world of diving, you can do something quick. You can do something quick, or you can do it thoroughly, but you can't do both. The faster you move, the less thorough you're going to be, the more chance you're going to have to miss something. And so, the benefit we had in the FBI and why I thought we were the best didn't necessarily come from we were the best divers or we had the best equipment or anything like that. It was really time. The Bureau always gave us an unlimited amount of time to conduct the job that we needed to do. And so we could go slow and methodically and do it right. We weren't any better divers. We didn't have any better gear than some of the teams. We had good gear, don't get me wrong. And some of the other teams matched what we had. But we were no better divers. I'm not saying we were better divers. I'm just saying time is of the essence. And if you have the time to do it right, then you go slow and methodical and less chance that you're going to miss something. So I would have to know who dove that pond and stuff, and the depth of the pond, the size of the pond, to make that determination on. But certainly, I know dive teams, and I'll be the first to admit there was at least one dive in my career that I know we messed up, and I messed up, and I didn't put my divers in the right place in the body of water that they needed to search, and we missed it. And another dive team went in there much later, a year later maybe, and found what we had been looking for the year prior. And that one job haunts me to this day, and probably always will, because it was all on me. And but yeah, things can be missed even by really good dive teams.
Now, would you ever take a consulting role as far as with local law enforcement if they had their volunteers of divers pull up evidence? And you would you ever go into the evidence room and look at this evidence that was taken from the bottom of a lake or something to determine, if you could get any forensics off of it?
That wasn't even my role on the FBI team. So as a dive team, what we would do is we would train with our laboratory personnel, not only our agents back at the laboratory, but the technicians and the lab technicians and the scientists who are going to apply the science. And really what our job was to gather the evidence and keep it in a state that the scientists tell us would be best for them, because ultimately all the evidence that we gathered goes back to Quantico, to the FBI laboratory, so the scientists there can do whatever they do with it. Our responsibility was locating it in a way that the detectives and the prosecutors could make the maximum value of it, and then protect the evidence in a way that we were told by the scientists would help them, process it later on. So that's keeping it in the same water. For instance, I used to see local teams, take a gun, say, and it's in a muddy kind of container of water and they can't see it. So they dump all that water out and put it in with clean water. Now you've oxidized the weapon, and now you're going to have degradation of any evidence that was on that weapon. So our lab technicians always told us, keep it in the same water that it's found in, and actually keep some of the soil around it on the bottom of whatever body of water you're in with it, and ship all of that to us. And I've had agents actually get on a plane holding the evidence. Most of the time we can ship it, but there were different cases that we needed to fly it ourselves back to the lab. But so I would advise certain dive teams on occasion on how to collect the evidence, but I would urge them to talk to their state crime lab and their scientists and their forensic scientists that were going to actually take that piece of evidence and subject it to some kind of scientific process. Talk to them, the people that are going to ultimately be doing that, and ask them how they want this evidence treated, how they want it packaged, how they want it collected. There's certain things you have to do before you collect it to document it for the prosecutors on one end. And then there's the certain things you have to do when you collect it so that the scientists have the maximum capability of exploiting whatever evidence might be on that object. We didn't apply scientific methods too much to the evidence. Like if there's a gun and we suspected it might contain a fingerprint, and by the way, we could get fingerprints on weapons that were in the water for 9 or 10 months now. So if we thought there was a fingerprint on that weapon, we wouldn't be the ones to dry that weapon and dust it with print dust, even though that's something our dry land counterparts can do. The FBI's, my counterparts in the dry land world, we wouldn't do that. We would keep it in the water, send it to the lab. They would then take it out in a controlled laboratory setting so that the drying process wouldn't destroy whatever evidence might be there. If we were to do that, we might destroy evidence, but at least it's in the lab in a controlled environment. So, we'd have to be very careful with that.
There seems to be some misconception that when you have committed a crime and you want to dispose of potential evidence, you throw it in a lake, or you put it in a bag with a rock and you drown it in a lake. What you're saying is there's a really good chance that things that are pulled from the bottom of a lake could be recovered. There could be some forensics taken off of them if handled properly.
Sure, absolutely. And, we used to cringe in the business when you'd see pictures in the local paper or sometimes video on a local news show where a diver comes out of the water and he just triumphantly holds the gun up out of the water that they found it, and we would cringe and go, oh boy, you can't do that. Once the gun, touches air, now you got oxidation process starting, and that, there's all kinds of things forensically that can degrade any evidence that might be on that weapon. Now, what we did at the FBI laboratory, we had our scientists, the benefit of being so attached to the lab is we went there and we had them actually dig trenches, and they made like I think they were up to 6 or 8 bodies of water, like little bodies of water on the lab grounds, and they put, different types of water in there, and they put weapons with fingerprints on it. And we did a study on how long you could still get prints off of a weapon. And so, of course, you have things that impact that, like fresh water versus salt water, warm water versus cold water, still water versus moving water, right? So all of those things we had the lab testing and stuff. So, we were pretty far advanced. That's the types of things we were looking at, in the FBI underwater forensic program. And so, to benefit from the divers. But certainly, anything found underwater you want to preserve as best you can and as quickly as you can, get it to the lab so they can, apply whatever scientific techniques they're going to exploit and the evidence that might be left. That's the one difference with underwater crime scenes versus above water crime scenes, is that the above water crime scene folks get to do a lot more of the, procedures and processes themselves, outside of the lab setting, where, the dive teams, we were almost strictly, tag and bag, and transport type of activity. There was very little processes that we can bring to bear on the evidence that we collected because of the place that we found it, and it should be kept in that environment as long as you can and get it to the scientists. And so, it was, we in the FBI, we shared a warehouse with our dryland counterparts, and they had like a mini laboratory that they could do certain field work there. We really didn't have that because we had to concentrate on staying alive in the environment where we were collecting the evidence. But once we collected it, we had to get it to the lab as soon as possible. There was very little that we could do to prosecute that piece of evidence, scientifically.
Gotcha.
Good answer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Lance, Blue Apron is the leading meal kit delivery service in the U.S. And while many people know what they do, many don't know what types of meals you eat when you cook with Blue Apron.
I mean, we're talking meals like short rib burgers with a hoppy cheddar sauce on a pretzel bun.
Or strip steaks with potatoes and spicy maple collard greens. A steakhouse-inspired favorite with a delicious twist. Chili-infused maple syrup. What?
Delicious. With incredible ingredients and chef-design recipes, Blue Apron lets you see what the power of food can do.
It's so powerful.
It's so powerful, and it's convenient.
Convenience and flexibility. Blue Apron offers 12 new recipes each week, and customers can pick 2, 3, or 4 recipes based on what best fits their schedule.
And we're talking high-quality recipes as well. Blue Apron sends only non-GMO ingredients and meat with, and I know this is a key point for you, no added hormones.
I am so sick of added hormones.
Who isn't?
It is delicious. They have a team of professional chefs putting in a lot of care into creating recipes each week. Blue Apron is treating Missing Maura Murray listeners to $30 off your first order if you visit blueapron.com/missing.
So check out this week's menu and get your $30 off at blueapron.com/missing.
Blue Apron, a better way to cook. Now, when we spoke on the phone, we talked a little bit about what possible outcomes happened to Maura Murray, and you were pretty low on the idea of a suicide. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it just doesn't have any earmarks of a suicide to me, in my mind. And this is just, completely my own opinion. And I'm not a psychologist, so right off the bat. But in my experience, it doesn't have, the hallmarks of a suicide. And one of the things that and there's been one particular case, actually an FBI agent committed suicide here in Los Angeles several years ago, where he actually went up and kind of tried to hide himself in the Santa Monica Mountains. And he did. And we didn't find him for, several months. And we had, the whole law enforcement community in Los Angeles turned out to try to find him. And it was an extensive search. And he just walked out of his house. So the area of search kind of was defined, pretty well defined. And it still took us, months and months to find him. But he had gotten himself way back in a ravine that couldn't be seen from the air and things. So it was a sad and tragic case. But even there, where you had someone, deliberately trying to hide their location when they committed suicide, they were found several months later. It's really, to think that she could have killed herself and not been found by now and not been discovered, her body, it's really, it's odd for me to think of. Even we had actually a suicide underwater where a woman chained herself to cinder blocks and threw herself in the water. So she locked it, so she couldn't she couldn't reverse her decision once she was at the bottom of this lake. Of course, when we found her, there was evidence that she tried to free herself, but she chained herself too well for that to work. But so you normally when someone commits suicide, they're not, they don't go to that great extent to hide themselves from being found. And so I would really find it unusual. And the family, talking to the family, it didn't seem like she was that despondent. Although there was obviously some disruption in her life, to cause her to go on that journey, that night, but it didn't seem like a suicide journey to me. And it didn't seem, I think that her relationship with her sister and her relationship with her dad, I think even if she was to that point, I think she would not have wanted them, to be in this state of never knowing. It just doesn't fit. To me, like I said, the suicide scenario just doesn't fit for those number of reasons. Number one, I don't think she could have hidden herself so well that she would never be found. And number two, I don't think she, would have done that to her father. And number three, I don't think that the other evidence surrounding this situation lead to that step.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. A lot of locals and a lot of people in this community have made a call for FBI involvement in the case. And just speaking from your experience in the FBI, is this a realistic or even a useful thing to put your energy into? Signing a petition and asking the FBI to get involved in a case like this. What's your opinion on that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, sure, it never hurts to, because the FBI is, somewhat sensitive to, the public. I mean, we serve the public. That's what we do. And so, whenever you can get the more support like that, and it could lead to maybe, a local politician joining the effort and stuff. Because I know, as part of the dive team, there were a couple occasions where, our involvement was because some congressman called, the FBI director and said, hey, can you help this? And, and the local place, the dive team tried, and we don't think, they have the capability and whatever. And those kind of things, the Bureau responds to very, very well. And so, yeah, it never hurts to try to, it certainly wouldn't be in vain. I mean, I think that there would be a valid look at it. In this kind of case, the problem is, normally if we're brought in earlier, we can bring some resources to bear as, technology and stuff that the Bureau has. In this case, it would really be more of like a fresh look at it. It would be a fresh look at the evidence. And the FBI is not the only ones that can do that. But, I've always found in working some of the cold cases that I worked, sometimes it takes somebody from the outside who knows nothing about it to re-educate themselves from day one in a case. And you might see things through a different lens, from a different perspective, that the original case agents case detectives that have been on this for so long have simply, not glossed over anything, but sometimes it just, even cases that I was stuck on, sometimes, I would bring in somebody else with a fresh set of eyes to look at things. And I don't think it ever hurts to have that. And so I just think that it's been so long, and the physical evidence, is just not there to kind of, reevaluate or whatever. I think the benefit of having an FBI presence in this case would be to have, a whole new set of eyes looking at it from a different perspective, a different angle, and seeing if they can see something from that different angle. We have very experienced cold case agents that's all they do, so they know, like common areas to start in a cold case, what to look for. It's a little different than starting, a regular case.
It's really refreshing to hear you say that, because we have a lot of people who will say, well, the FBI isn't going to allocate funds and manpower. It's silly to do sign a petition and try to get as many signatures. It's a wasted effort. So to hear it is really refreshing.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, they respond. I mean, I think that, it would help if you got local politicians involved, because, that's more of a pipeline to it. If you could get, if you can get enough names on a petition to have a congressman take a look at the case, and then he writes a letter to the Bureau asking for help. I mean, that's happened before. I happen to be involved in several cases that grew out of just that type of situation.
There you go. So there's your call out to the local politicians, the congressmen, congresswomen. Hey, community up there, why don't you write to your local politicians and see if they can get involved?
So in your opinion, Maura wasn't suicidal. What do you think happened to Maura?
I think she walked away from that car and someone, it's hard to say it, but in my gut, someone was an opportunistic situation that someone wandered by and either gave her a ride or offered her some assistance, and I realize full well saying that the bus driver did just that, or is alleged to have done just that, and she turned him down and stuff. So so I think it might have been an opportunistic person that came along, and whether they had intentions to do it initially when they slowed down or not, or whether that intention developed as they spent a little time with Maura, I don't know. It's impossible to tell. But I think someone picked her up and drove her somewhere, and she met her ends wherever they took her. That's just my gut.
Is there, I know this is off the top of your head, and I don't know if this is exactly the stuff you do, but is there some kind of profile of someone who would have been the person who picked her up that you can think of?
Yeah, that's, I'm not a profiler myself, but I work with profilers all the time. And like I said earlier, Jim Clemente is kind of my mentor in this business, and he's a very prolific profiler. So I would kind of leave that kind of thing to them. But from my experience working with them, I can almost sometimes, kind of anticipate what they would tell me on that. And, certainly it would be someone who has a history of doing this. It's not something somebody does for the first time. And then when I mean a history, it may not be the first time they murdered someone. I mean, it may be the first time they murdered someone, but they have a history of odd behavior. They may have been, arrested for stalking someone or molesting someone when they were younger or whatever, or things like that. So they probably have some minor criminal history. They probably have, and in their background, because that kind of person who can pick up, a young woman off the street or a young stranger and do anything like that to her, conceivably do that to her, would be somebody who has had that kind of background. And, it could be not their first murder, but it could also, I'm not saying it's a serial killer or anything like that. I'm just saying that, they probably progressed to that point in their criminal behavior that they have some kind of past in the system that, once they're ultimately found, then you go back and you go, oh yeah, look, he's got a criminal history in doing, things that led up to and progressed to the point where, he ultimately took someone off the street and killed them. So, that's my, very untrained, uneducated, attempt at profiling somebody like that.
Okay.
I've done that.
Cool. Thanks. So this person has, this theoretical person has gotten away with this theoretical crime for almost 14 years now.
Right.
What's going on with that person now that makes them still not get arrested for other things? Or I'm trying to sense where I'm trying to figure out where I'm going with the question, but
yeah, let me, because this might be part of the same question I was going to ask. If who you're describing is somebody who has had earmarked for escalating violence, and this was his opportunity to take it one step further. So in the 14 years since, did he stop escalating? What's he doing now? Is he just working, or she working on covering up the crime? What does that type of person do in the meantime, if they'd been escalating up to that point?
Unfortunately, they do other crimes and abduct other people. I mean, if you look at somebody like Israel Keys, he moved around the country and he would only commit a crime. He was a very opportunistic guy, and he told us in the interrogations, which, by the way, you can see on YouTube, he said, as long as I kept myself random to the location and random to the victim, I knew I couldn't get caught. Because when you think about a homicide investigation, you always start with known people from the victim. If it's a woman, a married woman, you look at the husband, you look at her boyfriend, you look at, whatever, a stalker. Or if all of those don't check out, then you look at the place where the person was murdered or found and somebody that's connected to that place. If you're random to the person and random to the place, it's almost impossible. And that's what Keyes knew, and that's why he was successful for so many years. And he knew that. That was his strategy. And so what he did was he kept what he called kill kits buried around the country. And when he got a call, he was this traveling kind of contractor guy. When he got a call from a buddy, say, "Hey, I'm building a house in New Hampshire. Can you come up for a month and help me put up the framing and whatever?" He'd have a kill kit there, and he'd spend a month there. And 3 days before he was about to head back home, he would randomly select a target and go and dig up that kill kit, which, by the way, may have been buried 5 years earlier. And then he would use that material to murder that person. And there was no connection that he had either to the place or to the person. And so, that's, so you could have somebody like that. They might not even be in that area. They might have been not from that area or not in that area anymore. And so if you don't have a connection to, that lonely stretch of road up there, that makes it that much harder to find. This person could be in jail on other crimes. He could be living in another part of the country having done this to other people. I mean, there's an infinite number of possibilities that somebody like this could have moved on. I mean, Keyes knew once he got away, he knew that, if he wasn't caught within, hours, weeks, months of a murder, he was gone. He was done. He was clear.
How long did Keyes operate as a serial killer?
He said, I think he did his first rape at 16 or 17. I think his first murder at 19, and he was captured at 34. So he did 14 or 15 years. He gave us 11 homicides that he had done, and he was playing this cat and mouse game where he would only give us a few at a time. And I think he probably was good for, dozens, if not more. But he hung himself at 11. We were able to get 11 confirmed out of him before he hung himself in jail.
That motherfucker. So, I can't tell what's more disturbing, the talk about Israel Keyes or the talk about the woman who chained herself to something and committed suicide, and there was evidence of her trying to unchain herself after she had already gone to the bottom of the lake.
Went to a couple dark places.
Yeah, Jesus Christ.
They all come back to me at some point in my nightmares.
Right, Jesus. I mean, I can imagine.
I have one more quick thing about Israel Keyes. Just out of curiosity.
I want to ask a question about Israel Keyes, too.
Yeah, you go.
Now, this guy was smarter than most murderers, right?
Who? Israel Keyes?
Yeah. Like, most murderers don't consciously think about that stuff,
No, absolutely.
Right?
He studied other serial killers, and he had a definite consciousness of how to avoid capture. Absolutely.
How the hell do you catch that guy?
Yeah.
If you look at his interrogations on YouTube, he laughs about it. He knew he made a mistake. He made a mistake with Samantha by holding on to her debit card and making a ransom demand. He had never done that before. But times were tough. He was living with his new girlfriend was a nurse anesthetist. She made good money. His contract business was down. He wasn't making money. He needed money. He felt like he was being emasculated, and so he needed money. And he kept her debit card and took a picture of her. He sewed her eyelids open and took a picture to make it look like she was still alive. And he made a ransom demand, and that was the key mistake that he made, because then we had contact with him. We were now communicating between us and him on her cell phone, and so we tracked the movements. We tracked his withdrawals of the ATM money, and ultimately we saw a trail going down the West Coast across the Southwest, and he was Arizona, New Mexico, and he was ultimately caught in Texas.
So his criminal behavior escalated. That's basically how he got sloppy.
Well, I mean,
because of
he made a mistake. He never killed for money, and he just, in this case, needed money. And if he hadn't used that ATM card, I don't know what the chances are that we would have caught him. I'd like to hope we would have anyway, but certainly the way we caught him was through his use of her ATM card after he made that that ransom demand.
We've heard different stories about where he was during the time of Maura's disappearance, but nothing very concrete as far as I know. Do you happen to know where he was during February of 2004?
Because that was so many years ago. I mean,
Yeah.
we were called in on what we thought was his last homicide, although Greta Van Susteren did an hour on him after the fact, and I saw it and got chills a little bit because on that path that I just explained through Arizona, New Mexico, into Texas, there's at least one missing woman along that trail that is unsolved that kind of fits his MO. We'll never know whether that's attributed to him or not, but so Samantha, we always refer to her as his last victim, but actually she may not be.
Wow. I didn't want to go. I didn't expect that, but really, really informative stuff. I don't want. I mean, actually, anything that can be just like thrown against the wall, right? If people want to look into Keys and find out where his path was, and feel free. It's like anything that you can talk about and dismiss is certainly welcome. I just have one quick final thing. What we're doing right now and the TV show and actually what we just did with Keys and saying if you want to look into it on your own, how important is this as law enforcement to you to know that there are people out there who are approaching it like this or approaching cold cases like this?
Well, I mean, it's hugely valuable on solving these cases because, like I said earlier, I mean, a lot of departments don't have the resources. A lot of places don't have cold case units anymore. And they're growing. The number of them are growing, but still there are a lot of places that don't have cold case units. And when a case goes cold, it's just not looked at anymore. And so, justice in that case is not going to be found unless it's picked up by podcasts and by groups like you guys and groups like the people that listen to your show. The justice is never going to happen in those cases because the resources have to be directed to more current cases that have more promising leads, because there's just not enough detectives to assign full time to all these cases. That's just a numbers thing.